Welcome to the Leaders in Payments podcast, where we talk to C-level leaders from across the payments landscape. We'll be discussing the products and services that impact the payment space today, as well as trends and predictions for the future of payments. We will also hear stories from our guests about their journeys to the top.
And this, I think, really has driven merchants who historically have always thought of chargebacks as a last mile problem, not something we need to get to today. 2020 was the year of we needed to get to this yesterday, right? And for some of our merchants, seeing a spike in disputes of 200, 300% month over month, it was really important to have technology in place to scale to handle that.
That was Adrian Sanders, the CEO of Chargehound, and he is our special guest this week. This is episode 59 of the Leaders in Payments podcast, and I'm your host, Greg Myers. And hey, before we get started, if you happen to office in Houston, Austin, or North Texas, check out Fuse Workspace, where their mission is to help others do more. Check them out at fuseworkspace.com. Okay, back to the show. Adrian was born and grew up on a small farm in Corvallis, Oregon, before going to Bennington College in Vermont. Prior to starting Chargehound, he had started and was running a crowdfunding company. He currently resides in Oakland, California with his wife and 2 young kids. Chargehound is the only fully automated chargeback representment service available, and they use technology to drive better win rates and better performance for their merchants. Their pricing is based on pay for performance, meaning that they take a percentage of what they win back, which helps them stay aligned with their merchants. Adrian has some great insights about how behavioral changes of consumers will affect the future of payments, and he also provides some sound advice for those just starting out in payments. We've got a great episode today, so let's get started. Hi, Adrian. Thank you for being here and welcome to the Leaders in Payments podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Greg. I'm really excited and looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too. So let's dive right in. Tell our audience a little bit about yourself, maybe where you grew up, where you went to school, where you currently live, a few things like that.
Yeah, I grew up in Corvallis, Oregon, up in the Pacific Northwest. Very rainy childhood, but it's incredibly beautiful up there. Lots of greenery and nature. So I grew up on a small farm on the outside of town. And then I ended up going to school in Vermont at a really small liberal arts college called Bennington College. Had nothing to do with payments or tech, studied things like literature and politics. And now I currently live with my wife and 2 young kids in Oakland, in California, in the Bay Area.
Okay. So how did you get to Vermont from Oregon? Just curious.
I just felt like there was more to the world than Oregon, and I wanted to see what another part of America looked like. And I really liked sort of the college I went to was very non-traditional. There were no required classes. There were no grades. You just get sort of a generic liberal arts degree. And so there's a lot of freedom to do kind of and explore with your education whatever you want, which I think when I was 18 and 19 was a bit of a struggle to to figure that out. But as I got older, I really appreciated the freedom that that sort of education provided me.
Sure. Well, let's talk about Chargehound. So tell the audience what Chargehound does.
Yeah, so Chargehound is the only fully automated chargeback representment service on the planet. So what we do is when we service merchants all around the world to help them fight chargebacks. So when merchants receive a chargeback, typically there's a process that's very laborious or time consuming. They kind of traditionally have 2 options. One is that they are going to have some team internally fight that dispute, or they're going to look to a third party that usually offshores that work either to someone in Barbados or Las Vegas or whatever, but it's all done manually. There's a lot of security issues around that, obviously now in the remote work world. And what we do instead of that is we use technology to completely automate that process to drive much higher win rates, much better performance, much more secure, scaling, global, all that good stuff. So that's really sort of what our core value is and what we're able to deliver for merchants.
Okay. And how big is the company?
So we don't obviously disclose. We're a private company. We don't have a whole bunch of disclosures around our size. But what I will say is we're definitely the fastest growing company in our space. We service hundreds of millions of dollars of disputes at this point.
Okay. And how do you go to market? Through direct, through partnerships, or a little of both?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. When we started Chargehound, we actually pivoted out of a crowdfunding company. My co-founder, Dmitry Cherniak, our CTO, and we had a crowdfunding company, and we actually pivoted out into Chargehound. And that sort of put us down this path of looking at what was out in the market, looking at how the payment processors worked. And so because we were able to automate that and sort of drive that, value add for merchants, a lot of payment processors engaged in conversations with us early on, and they saw the value that we were bringing to their merchants. So channel partnerships are super important to us. But also, as you probably know, chargebacks are sort of a weird world in the fintech space. For a lot of merchants, it's a last mile problem, which means that for a lot of payment processors, it's a last mile problem. So it's a really small industry. And so because I feel like we've been able to demonstrate really strong wins with really respected merchants, the referral and sort of network effects of just doing a really good job have really helped us grow. But now we're focused on traditional marketing stuff and, building out the sales team and all that. But for sure, partnerships have been a really important part of that.
Okay. Are there certain verticals that you serve or certain ones that are maybe more attractive than others?
I think that our mindset always is that there is going to be value add for any merchant that handles chargebacks to use Chargehound because we're technology. And so even if you're in a vertical that maybe you don't see a ton, like B2B, for example, but if you're still putting bodies on the problem, whether that's full-time employees or offshore, if we're able to come in and sort of allow you to put that budget and those resources elsewhere, it's going to be a much better solution. So I would say that we are industry agnostic. However, what I will say is that definitely B2C consumer facing companies see, the bulk of chargebacks, things like retail and e-com, things like ticketing and events, booking, hoteling. Those are definitely places where, especially over the last year, we've been able to drive tremendous value for them.
Okay. And you mentioned e-commerce, so let's dive into that a little. I assume most everyone has seen the uptick in e-commerce transactions in the last, I'll just say 12 months. I would assume that's been good for your business.
Yeah. I think there's no escaping the fact that COVID and the pandemic has, one, been a terrible thing for humanity. And if I could go back, I would not trade our company's success for what sort of happened in the world. But I do think it's important to look at silver linings and look at things that are positive. And I think rapidly what we've seen is an acceleration of user behavior that is going all digital. So people like my mom, right, who historically only bought a handful of things online a year pre-COVID, are now buying everything online. Everything is transacting online. And I think because of that, just naturally, you're going to see a rise in chargebacks. And this, I think, really has driven merchants who historically have always thought of chargebacks as a last mile problem, not something we need to get to today. 2020 was the year of we needed to get to this yesterday, right? And for some of our merchants, seeing a spike in disputes of 200, 300% month over month, it was really important to have technology in place to scale to handle that.
Yeah. So when you talk about having technology in place, is it like a subscription model or what's the pricing strategy like?
So in the sort of chargeback representment industry, there are sort of two predominant models. One is what's called, pay per submit, which is, hey, for every dispute that we handle, we charge you some fee. And the other is pay to perform, which is we only get paid if we perform, if we actually return you a strong return on investment. And we really favor that sort of pay to perform ROI model. So we take a percentage of what we win back. This really aligns us with the merchant and says, that Chargehound is your partner. We're not just a random vendor making a buck off of you every month. We're really thinking about how to drive more performance for you because we benefit mutually. And actually, we just posted a stat today that we had a 20% year over year increase in performance for our merchants.
Okay. Well, we can't stop talking about the company without me asking how you came up with the name Chargehound.
It's a funny story. We're big dog people internally, but we were also when we pivoted from our crowdfunding platform, fintech, I think, gets a bad rap sometimes for being a little drab, right? A little sort of just dry.
Right.
And I think that for me, it was like, look, we're coming into this. We're not an incumbent. We haven't been around for 25 years or whatever. We are bringing something new. We're bringing technology to a piece of the payment stack that doesn't have technology, like isn't really a core part of that flow. We should try and have something that's a little bit fun because, why not? Right? We're going to come in here and deliver value. And there's no reason that everything has to be buttoned up all the time. And actually, we went to, before the pandemic, we attended MAG, and our marketing team member, Meredith, she brought the Humane Society to our MAG booth, and they brought puppies to our booth, and it was a huge hit. And I just think we're all people trying to work together and find solutions, and there's no reason to pretend that that's not the case, that we're all human and that we can have fun while we're also solving problems.
Sure. Tell the audience a little bit about the pivot you made. I'm curious to that story and why you did that, what you were doing before and why you pivoted to this.
Yeah, so we had a crowdfunding platform, and this was back in 2016, and basically was doing fine. We had several $1 million in revenue. We had raised a round of funding in the Bay Area. But the issue for me was that I didn't see how we were different or going to be, so much remarkably different or better than a lot of the solutions that were currently on the market. And so we talked internally about, what do we do? Do we close up shop? Do we just stop? Or is there something as a team that we would want to work on? And one of the things that we talked about was, we really wanted to focus on technology as our key differentiator. And so we thought about something. We said, is there anything that we've built internally that is unique and interesting? And it's really funny because chargebacks for crowdfunding is a really fascinating sort of flow that happens in that, you can pledge $1 to a crowdfunding campaign, right? But if you charge it back, right, the merchant is on the hook for, the chargeback fees, the money itself, plus the time it takes to sort of respond to the dispute. And my co-founder, Dimitri, was just vehemently angry at people trying to defraud us for like $3, right? It's like, why would you do that, right? And so I said, look, man, we don't have time to respond to $5 chargebacks, right? We're just too busy. We're too small. We got other ththings to worry about. And Dimitri was like, well, we can figure this out. We can try and automate this and let's just at least win some of these. And so the first version of Chargehound was, not to drop a big dog pun, but it was right. It was dog fooded at our crowdfunding company. And it was just sitting there built on top of Stripe, humming along, winning a lot of chargebacks. And when we looked at it, we were like, wow, this thing works so well. And we went to our network in our community in the Bay Area of startups, and we said, hey, does anyone else have chargeback problems? And every B2C startup that I knew was like, yes, we hate chargebacks. Like, we would love to use this product because this is so annoying. And even if it's only 10 grand a year or whatever, it's still like just something, if we can just put technology on it, make it go away, that would be so powerful. And that's when we really knew like, hey, if there's something here, let's keep going for it.
You mentioned technology is a differentiator. What else would you say differentiates your company from your competitors?
I think probably one of the main things is that chargebacks are it's a weird industry, right? It's a piece that is often overlooked. It's a piece that just by the nature of the flow of it has a lot of complications to it and obscurities. The acquiring banks and the issuing banks, the card networks, the payment processors, they all interpret this flow slightly differently, and that gets distilled down to the merchant. And then the merchant doesn't really have a single source of truth, so they have to do all this stuff to figure everything out, right? So it's like, which reason code, which issuing bank, is this going to impact my auth rate, right? There's just layers and layers of stuff. And while I will say that technology really is what separates us, the reason for that in some ways, I think, is that because we are this structured API, because we parse the data, not with people, but with computers, we just learn so much faster than any of our competition. We know all the other players in the space, and I have nothing but respect for companies that have been paving the way. But at the same time, right, people talk about so-and-so is the head of this company. And, over their 20-year career, they've seen 50,000 disputes and had all this learnings about that. But I mean, I can query 50,000 disputes in 5 minutes, right? And so we learn at a speed that no one else does. Like when you can just query, 500,000 disputes, you learn a lot, right? And so that makes everything that we do and the decision making we do just a little bit more informed. And that edge really comes out in the ROIs that we do and the pilots that we win and things like that.
Sure. Makes a lot of sense. So we've talked about COVID and looking back 12 months and the increase of e-commerce. So let's look to the future. Where do you see the payments industry heading in, say, the next 2 to 3 years?
I definitely think that this sea change that we're seeing from COVID with user behavior, where people are buying everything online, and not just online, but wanting to transact really digitally, right, in a very different way. The change that you're going to see in the next 2 to 3 years will be unlike anything we've seen in the last 10 years. It's going to be so dramatic. It will be like what happened when we first introduced buying from a phone. I think what we're seeing is a huge demand for more fluidity, less friction in transacting online, but also in things like buy now, pay later, right? People are looking for the ability to quickly get what they need, and they're used to that behavior now. And I think that Amazon sort of had that market cornered in some ways with the sort of one-click purchase Amazon delivers. But we're seeing a lot of technology players come and bringing things like that to the door. Companies like Affirm, right, that I think are IPOing soon or whatever. They're really able to show, hey, we can figure out what a customer's buying ability is, and we can get them what they want and what they need faster. So that's going to put an enormous demand on merchants to reduce their operational complexity. So any systems that have a slight level of lag, right? So I think chargebacks are a great example of this, but it's not the only place, though it's the place we know best. But imagine right now that you're a large retail company. And in 2019, you said, hey, 20% of our volumes are online, and we want it to be 30% in 2020, right? Well, in 2020, 85% of your volumes are online, right? And you had a chargeback team in-house, which is probably 3 people, right? And now you're getting, 3 or 4 times the chargebacks. And the lag on your total cost of operation is ballooning because you have to keep hiring more of these people. They're getting more and more pressure to deliver efficiencies here, but we're not even keeping up with the wave of e-commerce transactions, right? And so when you think about those things, that's just a microcosm of what merchants are facing now, which is, oh, well, we want to do that. We want to keep up with the wave of e-commerce behavior and buyers, but our company now wants to go global, right? Or the only way to keep up is to enter new markets. So anything that can help merchants scale is going to have positive knock-on effects. And then conversely, anything that introduces friction, right, is going to have massively negative impacts on where they want to go.
Right. Want to pull the crystal ball out and talk about what you think might happen in the next 10 years?
I think that probably one of the big things that we'll see over the next 10 years is the demand, again, for less friction all around payment. And I think where we will see inroads, not to use the terms du jour or whatever, but I really think crypto has an opportunity. Someone has an opportunity to find a way to bring crypto as a way of reducing friction around payments to market. I think that merchants, things like microtransactions, while historically have kind of been a small part of the market, you're just seeing so much behavior around the world of gaming, virtual communities, online communities, and places where the demand for microtransactions is going to ask for a system of payment that doesn't want 3% on every transaction and 30 cents, right? So I think I would be surprised if that doesn't emerge as a major trend over the next 10 years.
Okay. Yeah, I would agree with you there. Well, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about you. So talk about your journey to becoming the CEO there.
Well, I founded the company or co-founded the company, so I've been the CEO since day one. But I think my journey of being a CEO it's an interesting lesson. I've learned a lot of lessons, I think. And I think that the best way I can think about being a CEO and doing a good job of it is you are really just trying to pilot the ship and move it in the right direction and build the right team to execute on everything in that process. And one of the things I think about a lot in this is being relentlessly focused on your goals and why your goals are important really help in rocky times. And so not everything goes to plan, and I think a lot of people think a good CEO should just have tabs on everything, should have every base covered, every corner sorted. But the more I do this and the older I get, maybe now because I have kids too, this is
added a new dynamic.
You can't, you can't cover every base with kids, right? There's only so much foam you can buy to put on all of your furniture. After a while, you kind of just have to let them figure it out, right? They're going to be jumping around. And I think as a CEO, one of the things I've realized is that we don't need to do 1,000 things perfectly. We need to be the best at a handful of things, and we have to be relentlessly focused on that. And I think it's really easy to get discouraged. It's easy to feel gutted by setbacks or losses or whatever. But I think the thing that's driven Chargehound is that our technology really is, in some cases, right, we've come in and competed with vendors that have been around for 15 years and, we're crushing their ROI by 200%, right? And so even though we're going to lose some deals because we don't have we're not as networked, we maybe don't have as much capital, whatever, the deals that we do win, we're winning so well that we need to keep going, right? And anytime we get pulled in a direction that's like, well, if we just had this thing, or if we just did this, or, if we just pivoted in this, it's like, no, we are focused on what we're good at. And there's enough there to keep going. That's really been the thing I've learned. And I feel like, not to, to bring it back to like my kids, it's like, there's a handful of things that I really value around family and parenting, and everything else. It's not like I'm not going to try to get my kids to brush their teeth or whatever. Right. But my day isn't a total failure if I forget one day. Right. Or,
we call it pick your battles.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And but it's amazing. I think when you're at a company and it's so important to you, you're a founder or you're an early team member, you really feel like there's so much scrutiny over everything that you do, which is partly true, but also like you have to combat that with the sense of like, no, these are the things we're great at. Those are celebrated. We try our best at everything else, but we don't have to beat ourselves up about every little thing that we don't do.
Right. So what is one thing work related and one thing non-work related that you're passionate about?
Work related, I think it's super easy. Our team is incredible. I love the people that I work with, and we love the reactions we get from bringing merchants online and servicing their volumes because they're just so much happier afterwards. Our case studies are great. Our references are amazing. And we genuinely really love, hearing from our merchants, like how much of a difference that we make. I think that's awesome, right? I think you can't ask for much more in business, especially in payments, to be the good guy as a payments vendor, right? Because so often you're not, right? It's sometimes through no fault of your own, right? But that we're able to make such an impact, I think, is really terrific. And it makes the team excited. And it just makes us want to like kind of keep pushing and going and getting better. Non-work related, though there is some overlap, something that that I've really recently been invested in is just really focused on trying to help my community here in Oakland, but just thinking generally about how to give back and how to be more engaged in communities. I wrote a blog post recently about some of the donations that Chargehound made at the end of the year. So we gave over $250,000 to food banks across the country. And this was sort of part of a plan that myself and the other two leaders of the team, Pallavi and Dimitri, we talked about as being important. COVID really forced us to think about hiring remote, thinking of the workplace as remote. And we found some amazing people, and we doubled the size of the team last year. But it really got me thinking about, well, all of these people live in these other cities and, they have their communities there and they're connected there. How do we show them that we care about those communities as much as we care about them as team members? And so one thing that we all know, right, is that as tremendously beneficial this move to online has been for businesses and e-commerce and for Chargehound, it's had a terrible impact on our communities, and especially for the people with the least amount. And so one of the big things that Dimitri and I talked about all throughout last year was food scarcity and food insecurity in America today, right? Talking tens of millions of people with food insecurity right now. And I don't see well, I'm hoping, right? I'm hoping that things will get better, and I'm hoping there'll be federal support to, really lift people up. But I think one of the easiest things we can do is give to amazing organizations that are doing tremendous work today. And for Chargehound, it was really the right move to keep reinvesting in our communities in a way that we felt had direct impact.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So you're relatively new to payments, but when I started in payments 15 years ago, it wasn't a hot, sexy industry. Fintech, the word didn't even exist. You couldn't go to college and take fintech type courses. Today, I think, people coming out of school, they look at payments differently with so much money being invested in it and the opportunities of fintech and payments. But, from your perspective, if there's, kid coming out of college, they're looking at the industry, but they want some advice on what they should or shouldn't do, what kind of advice would you give them?
That's a great question. I think, to your point, right? No one that I know in payments was like, yeah, when I was in college, it was like, wow, payments is where I want to be, right?
Right.
I was actually talking to Logan Vanderlinden, the director of payments at Scribd the other day about this, that similar for him, right? He did not come from payments at all, but once you get started in it, it's kind of like this tip of the iceberg that there's so much interesting stuff going on, right? And it's just so massive and it touches everything, right? I think for kids and just people in general, I think the thing that is the most important, regardless of whether you're looking at payments or not, but is what is the curiosity that's driving you? Like, what are the problems that you're interested in solving, and how do you like to solve problems? Are you a people person and you really like to, grease the wheels and sort of find ways to collaborate and make partnerships? Or are you a builder and, do you like to flex on technology and, tinker with stuff and sort of that angle? I think that payments is ripe for any sort of personality and curiosity, because we need all of the types of help, right, that we can get, as you know, right? It's just that It's a huge challenge and it's only picking up steam, right? I think what's wild to me about payments, and I've met a lot of people who've been in the industry for a long time, that I asked them, what was it like? How has this been different? And people are like, yeah, it was incredible, the amount of lift that, Visa had to do in the 70s and 80s, right? Even to get things going, right? Let alone credit cards in the 90s and 2000s, right? But then everyone says we're just at the start of payments, right? Online payments are just still this small fraction, right? And so I think if you're excited about the opportunities, you just have to really make sure it dovetails with your type of passion and the problems that you'd like to solve. But I think you should know that there is a place for you in payments, because there's just so many different challenges and problems to solve. And there's so many companies and organizations and, whether you're merchants or payment processors or whatever, that need creative and passionate people to solve some of these problems.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Adrian, we've covered a lot of ground about you and about Chargehound and your vision of payments. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up?
No, just that I think if you're a merchant or a payment processor and you want to work with us, please reach out. We're really excited about some of the things that we're working on this year, and we're always trying to make the product better. And the way that we make the product better is by working with other partners and other merchants. We learn so much from all the people that we collaborate with.
Great. So, Adrian, just wanted to thank you for your time. I know it's very valuable, so I really appreciate you being here today.
Great. Thank you so much for having me, Greg. It was a lot of fun.
And to all you listeners out there, I thank you for your time as well. And until the next story.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Leaders in Payments podcast. Make sure you visit our website at leadersinpayments.com, where you can subscribe to the show and where you'll find our show notes. If you enjoyed listening, please share on your social channels as well.